So thank you for attending today's session, Your Unfair Advantage, How to Get Your Edge in Public Sector Deals, Service Value, and Clarity. So my name is Derek Wood. I'm the Director of Channel Engagement here at Infrascale. And with us today, I also have Michael Coppola, founder of CJIS Solutions. Mike, say hi.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
We got a great shot of Mike in his blues. So today, we're going to continue our partner webinar series. So for those of you who haven't been following along with what we've been doing, now that Game of Thrones is over, maybe you can get a recap. We started this back a year ago, but for the last few months, we've been going along the lines of, in June, we had the GARTNER Magic Quadrant Award as a leader in the space, and we talked about our partner contest, which goes through the end of September, which we'll mention towards the end. In July, we covered moving from tactical to strategic services and how to use our services to kind of jump from tactical to strategic, and we gave somewhat of a framework of how you could move that way. And a lot of you here today and many others gave us a ton of good feedback, and the questions kept coming up and they were pretty similar. So today we decided let's cover a full DR evaluation tool in grade card, since that's kind of the template that everyone was looking for. So just another step in the webinar series, and we do take your feedback and create content and make moves based on it. So thank you everyone for attending. So today's agenda, I'm going to start with just a basic Infrascale introduction for the few of you who aren't already partners, and just to kind of, again, recap what we've been covering. And then we're going to talk about public sector and why right now is a good time to start talking to those contacts you have in the public sector. We're going to have Michael come in and really give us a rundown of CJIS compliance and why that's important and how that's an advantage to you. And then we're going to spend the majority of the time going through this new DR evaluation tool in grade card to explain how you can use that with your customers and in your sales cycle. And then we have some Infrascale updates to give you as well. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the GoToWebinar chat function. For those of you joining from your mobile device or a tablet, there should be a bottom menu option for chat where you can start typing in questions. And if I don't get to your question when you ask it, I'll try to my best to get to it at the end. Okay, so first we have our first poll, just to get an understanding of how many of you are already working with public sector agencies. So you have your options, it's all we do. Yes, a good amount. So that's probably those of you who actually specifically try to be working with government. Only a few, that means you haven't really put a lot of effort towards it, but you've landed some customers. And then for the rest of you, it's we don't serve government and we're really just here to hear about the DR eval tool, which we do have a good amount. So don't worry, we're not going to spend a lot of time or the entire time just talking about government. Okay, great. And let's share with everyone where you're at. So 12%, it's all you do. So you have some company there. 6%, yes, a good amount. 47%, only a few. And 35%, just waiting for the DR eval part. Okay, well, thank you for the answers, everybody. Let's get moving. So Infrascale, just quick recap on the Infrascale messaging and things that have been happening. Infrascale is first and foremost a cloud software vendor. We build software as a service options to help eliminate downtime and data loss for businesses of all sizes. So in the late 2000s, we were one of the first to bring a direct-to-cloud file and folder online backup from a very expensive kind of SME, enterprise-only type of service to become something affordable for everybody. And now we're doing the same thing with disaster recovery. And this year, this summer, we were awarded as a leader in the disaster recovery as a service space by Gartner in their Magic Quadrant, which is a big deal. And we have our recording on how to use the Magic Quadrant to your advantage and what that means to you and what that means to your customers as far as having a service like this on that you're providing to them. We're headquartered in Los Angeles, California, but we're internationally operated. We have over 1,000 partners, millions of devices. We have 16 global data centers that we use for backup, and with our partnership with Google Cloud Platform, that number gets even bigger very quickly. The big thing was, in 2016, we were very excited to be moved from a kind of an honorable mention as a cool vendor up to visionary, and that put us in some good company. We were right next to Unitrends and Datto, and then we had some of these other players up here that were kind of leading us. But this was a good indication that we were moving in the right direction. So this means that we had the completeness of vision, and we were executing on it, and we were making some hay. 2017, you see that the leader space really got quite narrow. So you had more people move in a negative direction than in a positive direction, and we had a big move in a positive direction. And this all goes back to our DNA as a cloud software vendor, because we leverage the cloud to make these services fast, reliable, and affordable. We've been able to do things that companies that don't have as much cloud computing experience, maybe they're hardware based and they've been bolting on cloud as the market has demanded it, whereas we've actually kind of paved the way for leveraging the cloud in this space, and we continue to be ranked as one of the best in the market for environments of any size. Some big points of the service is that we want to be able to provide protection for everything. We don't want to just be a specialist for virtual environments, or just for physical, or just for Windows, or just for Linux. So when we say we support Linux and Windows, it means that it's full DR capability for all those. It's not a limited functionality for one and then full functionality for the other. We have virtual, physical, Linux, Windows support for file backup, DR backup. We have a direct-to-cloud backup option that you can use to protect from data loss for some of your smaller clients, or maybe for your remote offices or branch offices or remote workers. And then we have disaster recovery as a service for those services or machines that really need to be protected from being down. If those services go down, then the impact to the business is quite substantial. And then, of course, ransomware being still a major growing pain in every law-abiding citizen's life. Being able to protect yourself from ransomware attacks is like a new traffic law. It's not really something that you should just roll the dice on and maybe we get hit, maybe we don't. I'm okay with this free antivirus software that we have. That's not really the case. There's just too much disruption at stake when you get hit by something like ransomware, and the way that it's evolving is really proving that to be truer and truer every day. Again, mixed environment support, so Hyper-V, VMware, you have some really nice recovery functions there if that's what you're using. For most people, they have a mixed environment. It's hard to get an entire organization to shift over all virtual, so it's nice to have that support. Because we're talking about government, naturally security is of the utmost importance. Usually the conversation starts with, for CJIS, for example, are you CJIS compliant? And if the answer is no, then there's no need to have any further conversation. So security has always been one of the major pillars of our service and the value that we deliver, and that's no different here. So we use FIPS 140-2 modules for our encryption, which right now is a 256-bit AES encryption, and it stays at rest when it needs to, and there's a lot more to it. The other thing we have is we actually do have a individually deployable authentication server that you can use for two-factor authentication, or here it's listed as multi-factor authentication, MFA. So this is actually part of the CJIS requirement, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. But this is unique. If you have customers that are really concerned about security, and you could tell them, well, what if we were able to deploy a server that would have the final say in authorization um, for the whole system, accessing backups, recovering, this whole thing. You could deploy that on their site or in your office, and you can do that on a per customer basis. And that's something that's very unique to us, and we built it uniquely for CJIS agencies and offices, but it's available for anyone to use. The flexibility in being a cloud development expert, as Infrascale is that we built the backend to be deployable anywhere. And we did that because we knew that when you go into high security environments, sometimes you're just going to have to deploy in a already trusted, audited, and controlled environment. And customers won't have the option to even go through an RFP to say, okay, well, let's see if we can get approved for this data center. Maybe it'll take a year, maybe it'll take 2 years. It's just far too long. So we just made the service flexible. If you need the data to be stored in a specific location and that's already set up, let us know and we can help you get that deployed in the back end. Just a kind of a screenshot of some of our government customers. So we do work with government. Infrascale doesn't directly target government agencies. What we end up finding is that we get contacted by various government agencies at all levels, federal, state, municipal, and a lot of it has to do because of the ranking we have. Some of it's because of referrals from other government clients, but it's just kind of a proof that we do have a good following on the government sector side. And for some of you who, the 12% that said it's all we do, this is good news as well. So let's talk about the public sector and why now. So the big why now is really talking about the motivations of customers, the buyers, in making a buying decision. Right now is important because we're coming up on budget season. And for those of you who work with public sector, you know that nothing happens except for just before and just after budget season. Everything else in between there is just kind of setting up to position yourself to get into one of those positions where either they're going to buy from you to use up the rest of their budget or to plan you for the next. And I'm going to let Mike come in and talk a little bit about this too, but the other half twos are usually compliance driven. But with ransomware, you can be in compliance but not protected from ransomware, and that's becoming a major issue. So you have a major CYA type of motivation in the market that we don't see very often. Mike.
So in regards to budget season, for those of you who work in public sector, you probably already know there's a couple budget seasons, right? You know that September is the real big one for most agencies around the country. You have the federal fiscal, which is usually in October. There's a lot of other agencies that'll follow GSA and whatnot, so they have an October fiscal year. And then you have, the June, July turnover. Those are like your really big three, with the primary one being the one that you're going into now. But the reason this is so important and why we try and do the government-minded, if you will, webinar in August is that you got to realize that the people that you're talking to are usually going to be the ones that know the most about the IT, or they wouldn't be talking to you. The problem with that is that they're probably going to talk to people who don't know anything about IT and probably already want to spend their money on other things like patrol cars and overtime and training and new vests and new uniforms and maybe hire cops, other important things. But the problem is this is one of those areas that everybody will point the finger at when something goes wrong. So they need to position themselves now. And that life cycle in the budget world is basically that person that you need to cultivate now has to go and cultivate somebody above them that doesn't know, probably a unit head or whatever. Then they need to go and sell it to the town. And by the time they did that, you're already into probably October. And then what they'll need to do is get that on a town council meeting agenda for public hearing and approval. Then it comes back for November for final approval, and then they'll hear about it in December, because some towns have to read it twice. By that time, If you decided that that's the time you want to start talking to people, that's already that ship's already sailed. They've already sold all their people internally. They already put it on agendas. So that key season is right now after you hang up this webinar until I want to say maybe the second week in October, if you're lucky enough to have a good rapport with people or good conversations or whatever. If not, the only other chance that you'll really have are the agencies that have money that maybe used them on a project. They didn't use all of it. Agencies that have been given a budget approval for operational budget that say you have X amount for IT, they didn't use it all, or they were going to use it on a project that fell through and they have spares. Those are the people that will give you an influx in December only. And those are really the only two people you're looking at, the pre-buyers and the, we have to spend it by the end of the year. Everybody else is kind of, like I said, downtime. You know, and quite honestly, we've seen it where you're working on 18-month budget cycles. So it's, you know, you guys are really going to have to know your customer and kind of where they're positioned as well, and maybe even know a little bit about the town sometimes.
Yeah, very clear. And we have an introduction to talk more about Mike and what he does and his relationships with Infrascale and also with you all. But all Mike does is work with law enforcement agencies. So he's one of the "it's all we do" folks, even though he didn't answer the poll. So this is great information to get, especially if you're coming into this a little new, or maybe the public sector customers that you do have were just kind of by chance they got introduced to you. You weren't pursuing them. It's good to know when to start the conversation because it's a lot different than in private. The big thing that we try to communicate to all these agencies is that when it comes to ransomware, you really only have two options, and you either pay out the ransom or you're going to have to restore. And the way that ransomware is continually being modified and improved upon in a negative way for us, you know, ransomware attacks are going to begin having multiple vulnerabilities. So no longer will it just be that they lock your files, but there's already been variants that have been shown to actually steal the data as well. There have been variants to show that they can modify files, which comes up when you're talking about casework, which we'll talk a little bit about. But really, you have to make sure that you have an option to get things back up and running the way they were without having your data compromised and without experiencing too much downtime. Or there will be people that get fired or get in trouble, and nobody wants to have that be them. So CJIS Solutions. So here's our introduction. I'm going to start for you, Mike. So Mike has been working with Infrascale for, I think, about 3 years now, 3.5 years. And he has two relationships with us. So he is also a managed service provider that just works with law enforcement agencies. But then what ended up happening is it made a lot of sense that, well, because we do have government clients and we have partners that also serve law enforcement, let's make CJIS Solutions a strategic partner. So CJIS Solutions also operates our data center, and that's really where the relationship with you all and with CJIS Solutions would come into play. So now, Mike, now I'll let you introduce yourself.
As you know, Michael Coppola. I am actually also a chief of police of an agency, of a state agency in the state of New Jersey. I actually created CJIS Solutions in 2012 when I went out to find my own CJIS-compliant cloud hosting and realized that it didn't exist. It just wasn't out there. So CJIS Solutions was born. Unlike other cloud providers, like Derek said, we only do law enforcement agencies. We were built from day one around the CJIS security policy, which honestly was the easiest part for us because I was inherently CJIS compliant. You know, everybody that we have by us is fingerprinted background check. We meet all the logical and physical access controls. And basically the data center, our operation, our corporate structure, everything is around the CJIS policy. And as Derek said, with the two-way street as far as our relationship goes, is that if you are out there and you're selling Infrascale products and you wind up with a law enforcement agency, or even if you have a town, this is a whole new revenue stream for you because you may not have realized, before this webinar that, well, I do everything else for the town, or maybe even the Board of Ed, since that drives IT in most towns. And now I could actually sell this to the law enforcement agency, because once you tell any of your Infrascale representatives that, look, this appliance we're selling, or, this software we're going to be installing is going to be for the police department, they will know that. They will communicate with us, we'll communicate with you, and basically what happens is everything that you know and do with Infrascale already, or which you will learn if you're coming in as a new person, just is the same. Everything is identical. The only difference is everything points to us as a CJIS compliant data center facility, and there's some other CJIS paperwork that we manage. And it's very simple for the partner, and it's huge for the law enforcement agency, because like Derek said earlier as well, and he's been on most of the earlier calls when we were introducing with law enforcement agencies, their first question is, are you CJIS compliant, and how? Because if you're not, the rest of the conversation doesn't matter. The call's over. They go on with their day. So, and like I said, a lot of other things we do. Infrascale is one of our major forces. We also do, other than the data backup, file sharing, email, two-factor authentication. So we provide all basic, everyday products law enforcement uses in a CJIS compliant cloud environment.
Right, and what's also nice for those of you who are new to playing in public sector, or maybe new to CJIS, so maybe you're dealing with a lot of government agencies, but CJIS hasn't been a requirement just yet. Eventually, Michael would come into play with your customers directly because of just the compliance needs. So when you talk to your partner specialist and you tell them, hey, Randy or Garrett or Patrick or Chad or Mike, whoever it is you're working with, we have a law enforcement agency. They'll let us know. They'll let Mike know. And oftentimes what we'll do is we'll set up a introduction call so you can kind of fill Mike in on what the status of things is so far. And then we can come up with a group of a plan of what the next steps should be. Whether that's a call with Mike on the phone with the customer to act as your sales engineer, your CJIS specialist, and that way any compliance questions that they have won't stop all the momentum that you've created so far. Because a lot of times they don't have a lot of patience. If you don't know CJIS in and out, sometimes it can be frustrating for them, and that's why a lot of law enforcement agencies want to work with Leo operated companies. And Mike knows all that stuff in and out and meets all those criteria. So it's a great resource for you all. And now we're going to talk about what CJIS is. So here's a bit of a crash course. Think of CJIS as the HIPAA for law enforcement, HIPAA being the healthcare compliance in the United States. So CJIS is Criminal Justice Information Services, is the second largest department within the FBI. And all of the agencies that access the information to look up a person when they pull you over, or do background checks, if they're hitting the NCIC database, they're going to have to adhere to CJIS compliance. So this goes all the way down from federal, state, county, city, municipal, and then others. So you have commissions, you have education. I think, Mike, I like what you said best, which is if they're wearing a badge, they probably need CJIS compliance.
Pretty much.
So to quickly go over the components, because we do have a recording on our YouTube channel that goes through this in much more detail. So we're not going to spend a ton of time going through the components, but one thing that's really important to note is that the big difference between CJIS compliance and HIPAA or any other standard is that there are criminal consequences for breaches. This is not just a wrist pat and with some fines. People can end up doing jail time, and that's why it's such a serious topic, and why when law enforcement agencies are talking to you about a potential service, if you don't know CJIS in and out, they can't be confident that you're not going to get them locked up for negligence or ignorance, both of which will still land them in jail. So it's really three areas: the personnel, logical access, and physical access. So personnel, Mike mentioned everyone's fingerprinted and background checked. It's a requirement to do a training every 2 years. Mike does his team every year just because the policies change and it makes sense to do it that often. Everyone is currently or previously active law enforcement agents based in the U.S., available 24/7, 365. So you have the personnel part down. CJIS compliance for logical access. This comes when we're talking about the types of encryption we're using, everything from the way the networks are configured, the way that the networks are separated so that they're on separate virtual LANs so that it's not using shared environment work, which would open up new vulnerabilities. There's a lot of the network connectivity that Mike does on his end in the data center that plays into this. The part where Infrascale really plays in is the authentication and being able to have the authentication server in a CJIS compliant location, accessible and controlled by CJIS personnel. I don't think that's right to say CJIS personnel, CJIS registered personnel. Is that right, Mike?
CJIS compliant basically means that everybody's been fingerprinted, background checked, proven to not have a criminal background, and trained. Those are the big key areas.
Okay, great. I have a good question here that I'll take now. DJ asks, are partners in any way responsible for the criminal aspects, criminal culpability of CJIS compliance?
No. Partners are not unless they're the ones accessing the data. You might have civil issues for misleading. Should you try and sell something off false pretenses, which you knew were false. However, unless you have some type of physical or logical access to the data, then the answer would be no. That would be, did you enter the data center and you weren't cleared and you accessed a drive or something like that, or misused a file or whatever. So if you're just selling it and you have no access to the actual data itself, then there's probably no criminal liability or culpability. However, then you wonder, you may go into the misleading side if the agency finds that you misled them on a sale or something, which is also highly unlikely.
Yeah, but again, that's why we have Mike available to chat before we get on them with the customer and during, so that we can identify what they actually need and what the concerns are, because any gap Michael and CJIS Solutions would be able to fill for you. So even if it ended up just being you had somewhat of a VAR relationship with this agency, and then Mike was brought in for CJIS services to actually touch the systems, that's something that you could work out with, and that's a deal that you would get that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't have this access. So to get a great resource to have. And then the final is the physical access. This is who can actually get to the building once they're in the building. How can they access the cages, and once they get to the cages, how do they get through there? So having visited the facility, it's pretty locked down. It doesn't get much more locked down than that. 16 points of verification between the vehicle and the server. They have all sorts of DoD, ballistic, and explosion proof entry levels, the whole kit. So everything you need. Again, Mike actually had to design what they needed with the requirements in hand, because like he said, no one else did this. I think Mike went through 20 different data center providers till he finally found one that was able to meet the requirement. And that's why you don't see this so often. There aren't a lot of government clouds out there. You have Amazon and Azure, but you just had Amazon where they weren't even really hacked. They just left the door open. And that's because it's not what they do. And that's all that CJIS solution does. So when we're talking about law enforcement or any agency, it's still very much like with most customers, the threat of ransomware isn't that clear unless they've kind of heard it word of mouth. A lot of these guys are not following any type of tech news, so they won't hear things like this. But if you just do a quick search for police ransomware, you get a ton of headlines of these different departments that have been hit. And most of them had backups in place. Most of them were compliant. The problem is that compliance is uh, something that has to get passed through a law with legislation, and it takes time. So it makes sense that naturally being compliant doesn't mean that you're 100% protected from everything that's out there. Technology moves very fast, even fast for antivirus and anti-malware companies. They're always one step behind. But when you talk about the law enforcement group, law enforcement in general are given all the best tools and equipment in the world to help fight criminal acts, except for when those criminal acts are technical, and that goes for their own environments as well. And so there's a quote here from one of the articles at Lincoln County. "We are cops. We generally don't pay ransoms." So you have you have quite an emotional trigger to play on. Don't end up as another example of how not to set up your department. And it's not always clear. To kind of go through, and I'm going to let Mike step in a second. One of the problems with ransomware and malware that enters through end users is the control of the environment once the virus is in the environment, right? So the phishing attack does pretty much all the work to bypass a lot of security systems, and then once it's in the network, it becomes a matter of what it has access to and who it has access to. Now, the exceptional problem in law enforcement agencies is that law enforcement has a very structured hierarchy. You have the chief who's in charge of everything. So when it comes to access to the network, the chief just demands access to everything because he's the chief. Why shouldn't he have access? From a technical perspective, this makes no sense. But from a police hierarchy, it's very common sense. But the problem is that this opens up everyone in that department to ransomware and every system attached to it. And so you have a lot of vulnerabilities just because of this relationship. And Mike, you want to touch on police agencies and dealing with ransomware a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just right on the heels of what Derek said about the hierarchy, I mean, I can tell you right now, almost every department that we've had to do full restores for had a good and a bad side of it. The bad side was essentially that the chief, detectives, usually people who have an Outlook account on an actual computer because they have their own office. Like Derek said, they have elevated permissions because of their rank, not because of their technical capability. The chief usually knows the least about IT, and he usually has the most access. And what happens is they're checking their emails, they're clicking airline tickets they never paid or whatever it is, and next thing you know, they're encrypting their whole department. And with network discovery, even some of them had their own local side backups encrypted because they had network discovery and the ransomware. The good news was that nobody ever got in trouble or yelled at because it was always the chief that brought the virus in. The problem was that, you lost all your files. But, a lot of the things that people don't realize, there's one thing is that I mentioned the network discovery. The newer strands do network discovery. So a lot of agencies are out there, and because they didn't realize there was an off-site CJIS compliant location to keep their backups, they only had on-site, and then they lost their on-site. The second thing is, excuse me. The second thing is, and this is something that nobody ever really thinks about, is that basically anything that's been encrypted, if an attorney ever found out that that police department had their files encrypted during a ransomware attack, and it doesn't take much to hit the paper, as Derek showed you a few slides before, you can throw every one of those cases out in court because you can no longer guarantee that the file was never changed while in police custody because you can't confirm what happened to that file while it was encrypted. So in a court of law, they just have to show that you got ransomware. You have no way of proving that the evidence that they had encrypted was never altered, changed in any other way. So the agency will wind up losing those cases. Now, if you did off-site backup, you could verify that in court, and we could even attest to it, that, yeah, you restored the original file back down, and that one was never changed, so you can maintain your evidentiary value. And a lot of law enforcement agencies, administrators don't even think of that because ransomware is still really new to them. And going back to those slides a couple times ago, 2 or 3 slides, whatever it was, 2 of those agencies that Derek showed you were actually new customers of ours, and they actually called us the day after they got encrypted because then they're like, oh, now what do we do? Because our USB hard drive that we take out home every night was encrypted too. I said, well, you should have probably called me 2 days ago, not today. But, so it's, law enforcement does things because they have to, not because they want to. They're not in the business of making money. and they're not an IT company, and they have to be educated. And what you're learning here today are some of the key points that might make them, better decision makers in your favor.
Definitely. And when you're talking to the towns, that's a really critical point to bring out, is the effect that such an attack on a police department or office or agency would have on the local judicial system. So it's not just protecting one department, you're protecting an entire system from getting backed up and losing a lot of money. So we have a little bit of time left, so let me skip through this stuff. So again, the important things to understand about working with law enforcement agencies and how CJIS Solutions plays into this is that CJIS Solutions runs and controls the data center that is CJIS compliant. And so all staff within CJIS Solutions that have access to those machines and to that data are all CJIS compliant and registered, fingerprinted, and all that. So there were a couple questions on who the all staff is. That's the CJIS Solutions staff. They came with Infrascale because the service was great, it was fast, it was affordable, and also because of our flexibility in being cloud specialists, we were able to very easily just deploy and modify the solution in the CJIS certified data center or compliant data center in the way that they needed. Other solutions just, it wasn't a matter of want, but they just couldn't do it. Competition, you have some government clouds, but again, they don't really do much more than that. You're not going to get any SE support or CJIS compliance support. So unless you have on-site staff that are CJIS compliant, registered, and trained, it may be hard to break into this market using those options. And those options are, it's not what they do as a primary business. So these agencies are going to be more comfortable knowing that they're in the hands of some law enforcement experts and active chiefs of police. So if you have any opportunities, again, call your Infrascale partner specialist, let them know, and then they'll set up the next step, whether that's a meeting with the customer or a meeting with Mike. All right, Toby asks, are we going to send out the slide deck? Absolutely. Okay, so now we have a little bit of time left. We're going to spend the rest of the time going through this DR assessment tool and the customer grade card. The idea behind these things is really to take the last training moving from tactical to strategic services and to give you all a framework from which you can do that. So the first part is a customer grade card. One of the biggest problems in the customer IT provider relationship is clarity. You're talking about experts in IT communicating with non-experts in IT and trying to communicate value. One of the ways that I've found to be most successful is put it in a format that everyone knows. Give them a grade card and have this grade card in very understandable sections. Security. This is designed to keep bad things out, good things in, and to maintain control over the data that's here so that we have it when we need it and only the right people are accessing it. Right now, you have a C-. And the way that you would grade this, it should be quite well understood. I would say that all of you should say that, having a C or maybe a B-, depending on what you want to do with the grading system, is you should pick a grade that is the minimum requirement of services for somebody to be your customer. You don't want to have a customer that has an F in security, because you're going to spend a lot of time and you're not going to make any money with them because you're going to spend too much time just trying to combat simple things that can be prevented. Same thing with business continuity, which is backup. So having a grade card is very important for clarity of communication. The second part that makes this valuable is that it gives you a clear value when you're communicating with them on a regular basis. You can show them over time, hey, when you first came into us, you had D's all over the board and a couple of F's. Last quarter, we moved you up into, passing grade range for every category. And then we really made sure that your business continuity was up to an A game, followed by security. And now we're focusing on efficiency and cost savings. And then you have the VCIO services that are different. And to get kind of a rundown of those different services, again, we have the webinar recorded and up on YouTube from last month. The second part is the evaluation tool. What does this do? Again, it helps make it clear to the customer the implications of having or not having certain services. When you're just doing it verbally, sometimes it's hard for people to take in everything that you're saying. So you can say it till you're blue in the face, but it's just a matter of, humans being humans, that if you don't understand something, it doesn't matter how many times it's said. Sometimes seeing things on paper or on a digital copy makes it that much more real and make it make sense. It really connects the dots. When you should use this is, one, reassess existing clients. If you going to your existing client base and doing a reassessment so that they can all have passing grades in basic security and recovery functions should be everyone's primary objective for the next 3 to 6 months, or a year if it takes that long. Next would be to help convert leads to opportunities. If you have people who are interested in what you're doing, if you can show them their current exposure and show them what you can do with a couple of simple changes, that should be able to push them over and have them understand why it is so important to make the moves you're suggesting. It's also helpful as a deliverable. So if you want to motivate somebody to give you a call, say after we do a webinar or an email campaign, to motivate them to call you back, you can offer up a really nice, concise evaluation, and it's not going to cost you a lot because all the work has really been done. Why do the clients care? Because clarity in services, especially services you pay for, equates to trust. And having a strong trust is the key to any relationship. So clear communication equals trust. Trust equals more value and a long-standing customer relationship. So let me stop here and let me pull up the sheet. We're going to go through it right now. So, okay, so everyone should be seeing an Excel sheet, and I'm going to post this in the Partner Resource Center so you all can go download it and play with it later this week. I designed it to be converted into a web tool, so eventually it will be, but right now it's just an Excel sheet, which gives you more flexibility anyways. So the first step is to just calculate their downtime. So we do that with two pieces of information. What's their annual revenue and what's their annual cost of operation. So here I just put in 10 million and here I put in 5 million, or whatever, 7 million. Then it'll calculate their cost of downtime divided by opportunity cost and operating cost. This is an important distinction because there are a lot of cyber insurance policies that are coming out, and for the most part what these insurance policies cover is a payment for to cover their operating costs while they're down, as well as the cost of whatever ransom they have to pay if they have to pay it. Opportunity cost never really gets covered in insurance or in any legal aspect, even though that's the most damaging to a business because there's too much doubt of when revenue's coming in, right? You can't prove that every hour we're getting $10. You get a sale at the end of the month, you get a sale at the end of the quarter. Times are too dubious. But it's important to have these metrics understood because this is how you're going to decide how worth it it is to put together a plan to combat downtime. The second step is to talk about their preparation. So we have 11 questions about preventative services. These are your security services, your firewall, tech refresh policies, and these are all yes and no questions. Here in the notes highlighted area, I've noted how this is calculating the chance of certain scenarios happening. For example, I have a minus 75% chance of hardware failure if you answer yes to having a policy where you keep all hardware within a manufacturer's warranty. The way that I came up with the 75% is because it's a general kind of rule of thumb that manufacturers warranties cover up to 15% hardware failure within the warranty, and then after that, it becomes too expensive for them to support. Now, you do have cases with some really big companies like Microsoft and others where they may have a 20 or 25% failure rate within that warranty period, but that doesn't happen too often. 15% is kind of the golden rule for manufacturers to develop their policies. So that's how that's calculated. Then you have your mitigation factors. This goes into understanding what they currently have in place in terms of backup. If something bad goes wrong, how long is it going to take them to get certain things done? And this allows us to understand and calculate their downtime for specific scenarios, which is the final step, define your scenario. So here I've already written out 6 common scenarios, and the idea here in the description is that it should be crystal clear as far as what's in operation, what's not in operation. So feel free to take this, modify it, create your own scenarios that are more clear or more specific to customers that you have. Then what you do is you go through, and this is all standard risk assessment. If you look up the Project Management Book of Knowledge, look up Risk Registry, this is the format that it's calculated in. The only addition is I've added 2 fields here to calculate overall business impact. So impact to a business is productivity. So I've divided it into, in this scenario, which the one I'm looking at now is ransomware infects the network, what is the impact to revenue generating activities as far as how much of that productivity is taken offline, and then impact to the rest of the operations. And then I just take an average to get overall business impact. You take this, and then you have a chance. The chance of something happening is the consideration that you have before you take other services into effect. So the chance for ransomware to infect your network is nearly 99%, assuming we're not already calculating in firewalls, antivirus, anti-malware, email filtering, user training, and all that fun. So this is just to, if you do nothing, what's the chance of this happening? And you multiply chance times impact, and it calculates out your risk factor. And the rule of thumb is any risk factor over 10 needs some serious attention. The output, once you've filled out these peach sections here, the input sections, is you get the scenario, but then with estimated results. So for this customer, based on the answers that we had, in this scenario of ransomware infecting the network, they get a grade of an F, and their losses are $169,000, which is accounted for a total downtime of 28 hours, 12 hours of which is just preparing the recovery environment. It's $94,000 in opportunity cost and $90,000 in operating. But if you had disaster recovery as a service, your downtime would be 2 hours at most, which would be about $12,000. And here you have to kind of explain the cost of downtime, because downtime costs are not linear. So if you're down for an hour or 2 hours, you may not have really any substantial losses at all. These are all estimates. As your downtime continues, the real impact of loss really starts to show. So but this is, kind of a simple thing to understand. I have some people asking for a copy of the grade card and all this. Yeah, I'm going to post this in the Partner Resource Center tomorrow, and then you'll all be able to download it. And then you put this into your grade card. So you have, your cost of downtime or your RTO. Maybe your RTO is how you calculate that. I have some other options in here for answer responses, so some canned responses to those yes and no questions. And that's something that you could definitely take some liberty with, because you all have somewhat different services that you're offering or different flavors, and you can modify that. And that's why we're delivering this as an Excel sheet and not a web tool, is because you all need to make this your own, and it's hard to do that if it's our web tool. Any questions on the grade card or the downtime evaluation? Do you like this tool? Anyone except for Samia excited to get it, or Sumo? Okay, let's get back to our presentation real quick. Well, actually, we're going right into some new things. So in the Partner Resource Center, we have how ransomware beats your backups, which is a good PowerPoint to use for just baseline presentation to explain the impact of ransomware and why it's beating common security and backup services today. Within the resource library, we also have data sheets that are co-brandable. So if you go down to you have our case study sections, which are really helpful. Get a CJIS Solutions case study in there. But if we go to our infographics, these are some other good infographics that you can use for any campaign you want. And if there are infographics or things in here that you like modified, or if you like an open version so that you can co-brand it, you just let us know. Tell your partner specialist, and we'll be happy to help you in any way we can. So let's get back to our presentation here, and we can finish it up with some Q&A. Also, if you don't already have the Infrascale Partner Central mobile app, I recommend getting it. In the follow-up email after this with the recording, we'll send you a link to register and download the application. But the application really makes finding these resources and getting alerted to new resources that we've created a lot simpler and a lot easier. Rather than having to look for an Infrascale email, which we try not to send too many your way, can be kind of tough to maintain. And if you have a lot of sales staff or a marketing team, a lot of those people aren't going to be on those mail lists at all, and they just want to be able to get to information when they want to, not when we're sending it. So this would also be a valuable resource for your sales and marketing team or your support team. So we have links to the different sales tools we presented today, recorded webinars, upcoming webinars, co-brandable material. Basically everything is brought together with this mobile app, so we recommend getting into it. We also have a new support portal, which is much nicer than what we had before. When you search through it, it gives you a bit of a hierarchy on the left, shows you the filters that you're using. The presentation in the preview of the articles is a lot more clear than it was before, and it's a lot easier to update. So check out infrascale.com/support. If you have any questions, or if you want to take a look at things, the organization and the way that it presents itself is a lot more useful. And then I have our final poll about our early access program. So the early access program means that we're going to put you on a list of people to send out an email to if we want to get your feedback on some new features or on our roadmap, or if we have a closed beta and we want some people to go out and test it and let us know what they think. We'll contact you in these cases. And this is helpful. This is, help us help you type of thing. Even if we have new program changes we want to make to the partner program, new incentives, whatever it is, this is a group of people that would like to give us honest feedback that would be helpful to your efforts as well as to ours. Awesome. Almost everybody was in the A or B category. Pretty much. Okay, so here's my ugly mug again, so you can add me on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, contact us or contact your partner specialist. And I'm going to go through some questions right now while we have our last couple minutes. Uh, all staff, IT guys or public? So yeah, when we said all staff are fingerprinted, we mean within CJIS Solutions. So again, you only have to be CJIS compliant as a person if you're the one actually getting access and touching data that is within the CJIS compliant realm. Will you be sending the slide deck? One of my colleagues would really appreciate all this. Absolutely. How do we get a copy of the grade card and the eval tool? We're going to post it in the Partner Resource Center, and I'll post a new update to Infrascale Partner Central once that's done. So you won't have to go back and check, every hour until it's there. You'll be able to see that it's there within the app. I got a question related to ransomware. How do we ensure that the customer, or that ransomware doesn't exist before we deploy Infrascale? Well, today's ransomware variants operate pretty quickly. In the early days of ransomware's comeback in the late 2014 and 2015, ransomware incubation periods were quite long as 6 months in some cases. Today, that's not so much the case. Today, because they're not attacking individuals, with the exception of WannaCry and NotPetya, because they're going after businesses and business systems, for the most part, they get in the system. Within an hour or two, they either get or don't get the access that they need to move on to the next step. And once they get, and if they do have the access, it's a near immediate encryption of all the critical systems, because there's no real need to delay. The delay in the early days was only to not alert the user that all this encryption was going on in the background. So not to alert, things monitoring different system processes or to slow down the system, control alt delete kind of avoidance. Got a question here. Wouldn't we need to be CJIS compliant if we are deploying the appliance local, or is this to cloud only?
Yes, you need to be CJIS compliant for deploying it locally because you're accessing the data on site.
So good follow-up question from me and maybe from Greg to you, Mike. So if I'm one of the partners and we get a law enforcement agency that wants to get a DRAAS unit set up, we get it ordered, the DRAAS unit gets shipped to that agency, and now it's ready for install.
In order for that IT guy to walk into the police station and have access to a monitor that displays criminal justice information, or physically touch or logically touch any port of that network, they must be fingerprinted and background checked, or they must be physically escorted and watched by a person who knows more than them.
There you go. I think that's a pretty clear answer. And Mike, you've worked with a couple of partners that don't have CJIS compliant reps. Do you usually ship somebody out if that's needed?
Yeah, I mean, everything's case by case. We've almost never really had an issue where somebody on site hasn't done it. Usually what we'll do is we actually make the appliance cop proof, what we call it, with big sticky notes and arrows and everything else. We even plug in the Ethernet cables that are color coded so they understand it. I mean, I'm a cop, I can get away with saying that, where we just say take the yellow wire and plug it into the number 1, and they're actually able to do it. And then it's usually, it's pretty simple that way. But quite honestly, 99% to almost 100 of every IT person that already has access to a law enforcement agency has probably already been cleared, or that agency's already kind of, escorting them when they're in the building type of thing. But some agencies who aren't IT savvy will ship them directly the appliance and just say, look, follow these instructions, plug it in, and we can log in remotely and handle the rest.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. And for those of you who didn't get your question answered, I'm sorry we didn't have enough time. But again, talk to your partner specialist, and we'll take your answers offline, and we'll make sure everything gets cleared up for you. So I want to thank everyone for joining another Infrascale Partner Web Series, and thank you again, Chief Coppola for joining us and giving us all that valuable information and going after government and law enforcement agencies.